Remote jobs are usually advertised by listing what is not there. No traffic, no office politics, no landlord upstairs, no one looking over your shoulder. The distance sounds like freedom until you arrive and discover that isolation has its own kind of supervision. Every empty chair belonged to somebody. Every penciled instruction exists because somebody learned what happens when it is ignored. And if the last worker left without collecting a final paycheck, the company will usually call that a scheduling problem. Tonight, I have 3 original accounts from people who took jobs far from the nearest occupied building and learned why the previous worker never completed the trip home. The first story is called The Night Relief. I applied to be a fire lookout because I needed 6 months in which nothing could ask me a question. That was how I described it to friends. The honest version was less flattering. I had ended an engagement, lost a management job I never liked, and signed a lease I could no longer afford. When the State Forestry Department offered me a seasonal position on Copper Ridge, the idea of living above an empty forest felt less like work than permission to disappear responsibly. Copper Ridge stood in the northwestern corner of the state, 3 hours from the district office and 12 miles beyond the last paved road. The tower was 40 feet of timber supports with a one-room cabin at the top. It had a bed, a propane stove, a radio, and windows on all 4 sides. Water came from a tank filled every second Tuesday. Food and mail came in the same truck if the road remained passable. My supervisor, Ellen Markham, drove me up in late May. She spoke about lightning maps, smoke bearings, fuel moisture, and radio procedure. She did not mention the man whose clothes were still under the bed. I found them while making room for my duffel. 2 folded work shirts, wool socks, and a pair of jeans occupied the back of the drawer. The shirts had a name written inside the collars in black marker. Louis Dane. When I asked Ellen, she kept her eyes on the supply checklist. Previous lookout, she said. He left some things. Should I bag them for him? He won't be coming for them. The answer was blunt enough to make me stop. Ellen softened it by explaining that Louis had walked off the job the previous August. His truck remained at the lower gate, but there was no sign of an accident, struggle, or medical event. Search teams worked the ridge for 9 days. Dogs followed his scent from the tower to a rocky saddle half a mile north, then lost it. The department classified him as having abandoned his post. The sheriff classified him as missing. Which do you believe? I asked. Ellen looked through the east windows toward the saddle. I believe your shift ends when your relief is standing in this room. Not when you see a vehicle. Not when someone calls from the trail. In this room. Understand. I assumed the rule had been tightened after Louis vanished. I said I understood. She made me repeat it. The first month was exactly the kind of quiet I had wanted. I woke before sunrise, recorded temperature and humidity, and spent the day turning an old brass fire finder toward columns of dust, logging smoke reports, and answering check-in calls from the district. Most distant smudges were farm burns. By afternoon, heat shimmer dissolved the horizon. At night, scattered towns glowed like embers along the valley floor. Louis's name appeared throughout the station log. His handwriting was small and precise. For 2 seasons he had recorded weather, aircraft, animals, and visitors without wasting a word. A typical entry read, dry lightning, 3 strikes west of Cardinal Butte, no smoke. Another noted that a black bear had pulled the lid from the water cistern. The entries changed during his final week. On August 17th, he wrote that someone had called on the service radio after midnight and asked for directions to the tower. No call sign was given. On the 18th, the same voice reported a fire below the north saddle. Louis saw no smoke. On the 19th, he wrote one sentence twice. Night relief is climbing from the wrong road. There was no night relief at Copper Ridge. Lookouts lived in the station for 10-day rotations. Replacement happened in daylight because the access road was dangerous even when visible. His final complete entry was dated August 21st. At 1:40 a.m., somebody knocked on the trapdoor beneath the cabin. Lewis asked for a name. The visitor answered Lewis Dane. He ended the entry with Ellen's rule, underlined so hard the pencil had torn the paper. My shift ends when my relief is standing in this room. The next page had been removed. I asked Ellen about the log during our evening check-in. Static filled the radio for several seconds before she answered. Old stations collect old stories, she said. Lewis spent too much time alone. Did he report someone climbing the tower? He reported many things that weren't there. Why did you give me the same rule? She paused again. Because it is the rule. After that, she changed the subject to fuel readings. July brought the first heat wave. Thunderstorms crossed the mountains without rain, and I began sleeping in my work clothes. On the sixth night, lightning struck somewhere beyond Cardinal Butte. I watched the dark for an orange point and found none. At 1:40 in the morning, the service radio clicked on. The channel was normally quiet after the district's 10 o'clock roll call. A burst of static came through, followed by a man's breath. Copper Ridge, this is night relief. His voice was low and ordinary. That made it worse than a whisper would have. I did not answer. Copper Ridge, I am at the lower gate. Confirm the road. I crossed to the south window. Moonlight silvered the switchbacks. The lower gate was hidden by trees, but no headlights moved below. The radio clicked again. The road is blocked. I will approach on foot. I called the district office on the telephone. The line produced a soft hum and nothing else. My cell phone showed no service, which was normal. I switched to the emergency radio channel and called Ellen. No response. The voice returned on the service channel. You can begin packing. I shut the radio off. For the rest of the night, I sat in the center of the cabin with every exterior light on. Nothing climbed the stairs. Nothing knocked. When sunrise reached the ridge, the telephone worked again. Ellen listened to my report without interrupting. Did you identify yourself? She asked. No. Did you tell it you were alone? It already knew where I was. That wasn't what I asked. I told her exactly what I had said, which was nothing. She sounded relieved. There was a lightning repeater fault last night, she said. You may have received an old transmission. An old transmission that told me I could pack. Radio can do strange things in mountains. I asked her whether Lewis had heard the same voice. She said the supply truck would arrive Tuesday and ended the call. The next morning, I walked to the lower gate. Dust lay smooth across the road. No vehicle had approached. At the gate itself, however, a set of boot prints began on the inside of the locked chain. They led uphill. The soles had a deep square heel and a missing wedge on the left toe. I photographed them, then followed for 100 yards before good sense returned. The prints continued up the center of the road and did not disturb the loose gravel as much as they should have. In several places, I could see the complete pattern on top of pine needles too fragile to support a boot. I went back to the tower and compared them with Lewis's boots under the bed. The left sole had the same missing wedge. That afternoon, I packed the clothes into a contractor bag. When the supply driver arrived, I handed him the bag and said it belonged at the district office. He recognized the name on the shirt. Ellen told me never to bring those down, he said. Why? Said Dane might need them if he came off the ridge. He would not take the bag. I put it in the shed beneath the tower and locked the door. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. Then smoke settled into the valley from fires across the state line. Visibility dropped to 10 miles, then 5. The world beyond the windows became a brown circle, and ash collected along the sills. The quiet interval almost convinced me that moving the clothes had caused the visit. Then 2 hikers appeared on the south road near sunset. They were a married couple carrying bright packs and using a printed trail map that incorrectly marked the tower as a public shelter. I gave them water, corrected their route, and watched them descend toward the ranger campground. Before leaving, the husband asked whether another lookout worked with me. He had seen a man in uniform standing beneath the north side of the tower when they approached. The man stepped behind one of the timber supports and did not come out. I searched the stairs, shed, and ground with the hikers still present. Nobody was there. The husband described the uniform as dark green with a round yellow patch. The design discontinued in 1972. I radioed the campground and asked a ranger to confirm when the couple arrived. He called at 9 and said they were safe. At 1:40, the service channel carried the husband's voice. He said his wife had broken her ankle on the north saddle and asked me to leave the tower with the first aid kit. While he spoke, I could hear the real couple laughing in the background of the ranger's open radio at the campground. The false husband repeated the request. This time, he added that Louis Dane was already with them. I kept the microphone on its hook. The voice tried the wife's tone next, then the ranger's, then Ellen's. Each version was exact except for the breathing. All 4 borrowed voices inhaled at the same moments, slow and deep, as if one chest stood behind them. The final call used my own voice. "You asked for 6 months in which nobody could ask you a question," it said. "I only need one answer." I had never spoken those words on the mountain. I had written them in an email before accepting the job. That was when I understood the thing below was not simply copying radio traffic. It was looking through whatever each worker had left behind, building a relief that knew exactly why we wanted to go. The false calls began every night at 1:40. Sometimes the voice said it was at the gate. Sometimes it asked for a weather reading. Once it used my full name and told me the district had approved an early rotation. I never answered. On the 4th night, it began speaking before the radio clicked on. I heard it faintly beneath the floor, repeating the standard arrival call through the locked trapdoor. "Copper Ridge, this is night relief." The tower stairs creaked in the wind. I turned off the cabin lights so I could see outside. A flashlight moved in the trees below, too steady to belong to a person walking over rough ground. It crossed the lower road, disappeared behind the shed, and emerged at the base of the tower. The beam tilted upward. I could not see who held it. The radio came alive behind me. "I am at the station." The first stair groaned. Then the second. I grabbed the emergency flare pistol from the wall cabinet. It was intended for signaling aircraft, not defense, but it was the only thing in the cabin that felt decisive. The steps climbed slowly. Whoever was below placed both feet on each tread before moving to the next. The sound reached the top landing and stopped beneath the trapdoor. 3 knocks rose through the floor. "State your name," I called. For several seconds, there was only wind. Then the voice answered in perfect imitation of me. It gave my full name, my employee number, and the date my contract ended. "Your shift is complete," it said. I aimed the flare pistol at the trapdoor. "My relief has to be in the room." The latch turned once. I had bolted it from above, then opened the door. I stayed there until dawn, holding the flare gun with both hands. The visitor did not knock again. Just before sunrise, the stairs creaked downward in the same slow rhythm. When I looked outside, the flashlight was traveling north toward the rocky saddle. The district sent 2 officers and Ellen by helicopter that morning. They found boot prints on every stair. The prints crossed the landing and stopped against the locked trapdoor. Ellen examined the tread pattern, then went to the shed and opened it. Lewis's clothes were gone. She finally told me what the missing page of his log had contained. Lewis had answered the night relief on his last evening. He told the caller that he was alone and demanded to know who had authorized a replacement. At dawn, Ellen reached him by radio. He sounded calm. He said his relief had arrived and that he was walking down. Searchers later found the torn log page folded in the drawer with his clothes. Lewis had written that the man outside looked exactly like him except for the uniform. The copy wore an older forestry shirt with a shoulder patch discontinued in 1972. Ellen burned the page at the district office. She left the clothes because every time they removed them from the mountain, they reappeared under the bed before the next rotation. Why staff the tower at all? I asked. Because when it's empty, the calls spread to the other stations. I quit in the helicopter. 3 weeks later, a lightning fire swept across Copper Ridge. The department evacuated every lookout in the district and let the tower burn. The official report said the structure collapsed shortly after midnight. At 1:40 the next morning, all 6 occupied towers received the same transmission. It was my voice. Copper Ridge, this is night relief. I am approaching on foot. The recording is the reason Ellen resigned. I have listened to it once. Beneath my voice, almost lost in the radio hiss, another man is repeating the words half a second ahead of me. Ellen believes that voice belongs to Lewis Dane. The department rebuilt Copper Ridge the following spring. The new tower has an automatic camera, a weather station, and no resident lookout. According to the public website, it has transmitted normally ever since. That is not quite true. Every night at 1:40, the camera turns away from the horizon and points down at the lower gate. It remains there until sunrise. The next account comes from a reservoir operator who inherited an underground control room, a sealed inspection gallery, and a stack of reports signed by a man missing for 9 months. It is called Gallery 9. Vale Dam was not as remote as Copper Ridge on a map. The nearest town was 18 miles away, and a county road crossed the crest. During the day, fishermen parked near the boat ramp and tourists took pictures from the overlook. At night, it might as well have been below the ocean. The public gates closed at sunset. A security officer watched the crest from a booth at the eastern end. The operating staff worked inside the right abutment, reached through a steel door set into the concrete. Once that door closed, 300 feet of dam separated the control room from open air. I took the night operator position after 5 years maintaining municipal pump stations. The pay was better, the schedule gave me 4 days off, and most of the work involved watching numbers that rarely changed. My predecessor was named Martin Fenn. The Water Authority never used the word missing during my interview. The operations manager said Martin had experienced a personal emergency and vacated the role without notice. I only learned the truth from Dell, the day operator, during my first handover. Martin had vanished 9 months earlier in the middle of a shift. His car remained outside. His lunch was in the refrigerator. The control room camera showed him leaving his desk at 2:16 in the morning with a clipboard and flashlight. He walked into the inspection corridor and never returned. Search teams opened every gallery, sump, valve chamber, and access shaft inside the dam. Divers checked the intake screens. The sheriff found no body and no route by which Martin could have left unseen. He was tired, Dell said. This room can make you hear things. He tapped the concrete wall. A low vibration passed through it from the turbines half a mile downstream. If somebody calls from inside, check the extension before you answer. There were 8 wall telephones throughout the structure. Each had a brass plate marked with its location. Dell showed me the list beside the console. Control room, Crest Security, Generator Hall, East Intake, West Intake, Gallery 3, Gallery 6, Gallery 8. The list skipped numbers because not every horizontal passage had a phone. Which extension shouldn't I answer? I asked. Dell smiled as if he had delivered a familiar joke. 9. Then he left before I could ask what that meant. My shift began at 6 in the evening. I logged reservoir elevation, downstream flow, gate position, seepage, and pressure at a series of instruments called piezometers. Every 2 hours, I walked the main inspection corridor and checked for leaks. The air was always 52 degrees and smelled of wet stone. Water gathered in channels along the floor and ran toward automatic sumps. The dam had been built in stages. Newer concrete met older sections at vertical seams. Blue lines painted on the walls marked safe routes to the control room. Red lines led toward restricted areas where obsolete tunnels had been filled during a reinforcement project. At midnight, Veiled Dam expressed itself through sound. Pipes knocked. Relays clicked inside cabinets. The concrete made long, settling noises when the reservoir cooled. None sounded human once I learned their patterns. During my second week, I found Martin's inspection reports. They were in a locked drawer whose key had been taped under the desk. I was looking for spare batteries and discovered a binder labeled Supplemental Readings. The first page showed a standard table for seepage, pressure, and temperature. Across the top, Martin had written Gallery 9. The structure had no Gallery 9. I checked the plans. The numbered passages ended at 8. Beyond it, an old diversion tunnel had been packed with concrete before the reservoir was filled. Martin had completed one Gallery 9 report every night for almost 3 years. Each was timed 2:16 a.m. The measurements changed gradually with reservoir elevation. A column labeled occupancy always contained the number 1. His final report was different. The date matched the night he vanished. The pressure and seepage columns were blank. Occupancy showed 2. At the bottom, he had written, "Do not let it complete the handover." I brought the binder to Dell the next afternoon. He did not touch it. "Put that back. You knew about this?" Martin invented an inspection route. Management told him to stop. Why keep 3 years of forms? Dell glanced toward the operations manager's office. Because the readings were accurate. He explained that every number in Martin's binder corresponded to a real instrument, but the instruments did not belong to Veiled Dam. Their serial numbers appeared on equipment installed in the original Valley Waterworks before the reservoir existed. The waterworks had stood in a town called Harrow, 6 miles upstream from the dam. When the valley flooded in 1961, the town's brick pump house remained intact under 140 feet of water. Somehow, Martin's readings matched sensors inside it. The authority had confirmed that with a submersible survey. They had also found a telephone cable running from the drowned pump house toward the dam. It entered the old diversion tunnel beneath the reservoir floor. "The cable shouldn't still work," Dell said. "It isn't connected here. But extension 9 is." He looked at the wall phone. "Only at 2:16. That night, I considered calling in sick. Pride kept me at the desk. I told myself that Martin had built an elaborate fiction around unexplained electrical interference, and Dell had participated because remote workplaces grow rituals the way basements grow mold. At 2:15, I switched the wall phone to speaker and watched the extension display. The minute changed. The phone rang. The display showed 009. I let it ring 6 times. On the 7th, the speaker activated without being touched. Water moved at the other end. Not a drip or a pipe hiss. It was the broad, slow sound of water inside a room. A man said my name. I recognized Martin's voice from the security recording. "Don't answer me," he said. "Just listen." I remained still. "The west pressure is going to fall 3 points. When the alarm comes, do not open bypass 4. The line disconnected. 30 seconds later, the west pressure reading fell. An alarm instructed me to open bypass valve 4. I left it closed. The pressure recovered on its own. At handover, I told Delaware. He sat heavily in the spare chair. "Martin used to predict faults," he said. "That was why management tolerated the reports. He saved the west intake once." "Where is he?" "He called from his house for the first few months. You said he never went home." "He didn't. But the extension display showed his home number. His wife answered once. She heard him speaking from their kitchen while she was standing in it alone. The authority disconnected the phone after that. Calls began coming through the alarm speakers instead, so they reconnected it. If you follow the warning, does anything happen? Usually no. Usually? Dell pressed his palms together. Every warning prevents a failure. Every prevented failure raises the reservoir by a fraction. Martin said it was building a path. The next call came 2 nights later. Martin told me not to start a drainage pump. I ignored him and followed procedure. The pump seized within seconds. Its motor burned out and filled the corridor with smoke. After that, I listened. His instructions were never dramatic. Delay a gate test. Close one valve before opening another. Send the security officer away from the west stairs. Each choice prevented a believable accident. I began recording the calls and documenting the results. Management responded by ordering me not to mention Martin in official logs. I used one of my days off to find the engineer who had supervised the last reinforcement project. His name was Roland Vey, and he lived in a retirement community 2 counties south. He refused to discuss the dam by telephone, but agreed to meet after I sent him a photograph of Martin's binder. Roland was 83 and nearly blind. He ran his fingers over the photographed form as if the page had texture. "We found that table in the diversion tunnel," he said. "Not the paper. The instrument board. During reinforcement, workers drilled a test bore through what should have been solid fill. The bit entered an open cavity. A camera lowered through the bore showed a dry concrete room containing instruments from the Harrow Waterworks. The room could not have physically fit between the dam and the reservoir bed. On its far wall was an occupancy board with mechanical number wheels. It displayed 1. The crew heard a telephone ringing inside the cavity. When a foreman answered the nearest construction phone, his own voice told him the bore was about to flood. He evacuated the tunnel seconds before reservoir water burst through the hole. Engineers filled the entire approach with high-pressure grout. Before the last truck finished pumping, the occupancy board turned to 0. That was the last clear image from the camera. "Why call it Gallery 9? I asked. "Because the plans had 8 galleries, and nobody wanted to name a room that wasn't ours." Roland told the authority to remove every abandoned communication cable connected to the old diversion works. They cut the lines at both ends. The next morning, the cable from Harrow lay reconnected in the junction cabinet, clean and dry. He gave me one final warning. A dam is built to hold 2 places apart. Water on one side, air on the other. That room gets closer whenever an operator treats it like part of the structure. By logging Martin's readings, I had been giving Gallery 9 an official location. In private, the operations manager asked whether Martin sounded lucid. "He sounds cold," I said. She looked toward the reservoir wall. "He always hated cold water." Weeks passed. The reservoir rose with spring runoff. Martin's nightly voice grew clearer. Background water that had once reached his ankles seemed to reach his waist. He began giving me readings after each warning. I wrote them in the supplemental binder. Occupancy remained 2. "Who is with you?" I asked one night before remembering his instruction not to answer. The line became quiet. "Now it knows you're there," he said. Every alarm on the console illuminated at once. The control room door unlocked behind me. Beyond it, the main corridor should have extended 90 feet before turning toward Gallery 3. Instead, it continued straight into darkness. A red line ran along the wall where the blue safe route stripe should have been. Far down the passage, a flashlight moved. Martin spoke through the wall phone. "Close the door before it reaches you." I slammed it and turned the manual wheel. Something struck the other side once. Water seeped under the threshold, spread across the floor, and stopped at the legs of my chair. At sunrise, the corridor was normal. Security footage showed me opening the door, staring at a concrete wall, and closing it again. There was no water on camera. I demanded a transfer. Management approved it, but the replacement operator could not start for 3 weeks. The Water Authority offered double pay if I completed the schedule. I wish I could say money had nothing to do with my staying. It did. My final shift coincided with the annual maximum reservoir level. At 1:50 in the morning, the crest guard reported vibration beneath his booth. Piezometer readings climbed across the west side. The system recommended opening bypass 4. I waited for Martin's call. At 2:16, extension 9 rang. This time, a woman answered. She sounded exactly like my wife. She said our son had fallen down the stairs and asked me to come home. I reached for the receiver before I remembered that my wife and I did not have a son. The voice began crying. Behind it, Martin shouted from a great distance. "Do not complete the handover." The control room door unlocked. The red corridor waited beyond it. The flashlight was much closer than before. A man in a wet gray uniform stood at its edge. He wore Martin's face. The real Martin kept shouting through the phone. The man in the corridor lifted a clipboard. Water streamed from his sleeves. He spoke with my voice. "Night operator reporting for relief." Every indicator on the console turned green. The system printed a handover form by itself. There were 2 signature lines. Martin's name appeared on the outgoing line. Mine appeared beneath incoming. I understood then that occupancy did not count people in Gallery 9. It counted the 2 ends of a shift. 1 worker inside and 1 being prepared outside. Martin had prevented each mechanical failure because a major emergency would force a formal relief and create a signed transfer. Gallery 9 had spent 9 months trying smaller routes into the control room. The false operator stepped forward. I did the only thing Martin had consistently told me not to do. I opened bypass 4. The valve drove against reservoir pressure. The red corridor vanished behind a wall of black water. The control room shook hard enough to break ceiling lights. Alarms sounded across the console. For 11 minutes, the bypass released water into the emergency spillway. Downstream sirens woke 3 towns. The reservoir dropped just over 4 inches. That was enough. Extension 9 went silent. The printed handover form dissolved into wet pulp. When I opened the door, the ordinary corridor was flooded ankle-deep, and Martin's flashlight lay against the wall. Searchers found his hard hat in the sealed approach to the old diversion tunnel. The concrete plug behind it was intact. On its surface, someone had written a final set of readings with a grease pencil. Occupancy, 0. The authority fired me for the unauthorized release. I was also fined and temporarily investigated for sabotage. No charges were filed because the bypass inspection revealed a fracture in the gate housing. Engineers estimated that if the reservoir had remained at maximum level for another hour, the housing could have failed and released 10 times as much water without control. Vale Dam no longer staffs the night shift. Its systems are monitored remotely from the city. Dell retired. The operations manager transferred. Martin Finn is still legally missing. His wife received one final call 6 months after I left. It came from extension 9, though the number had been disconnected and removed from the dam. Martin did not speak. She heard him unlock their front door, set his keys in the ceramic bowl beside it, and walk from room to room as though checking that everything remained where he had left it. Before the call ended, he whispered that he had finally made it home. When she went downstairs, the ceramic bowl was wet. The last account comes from a communications technician sent alone to a mountain relay during a blizzard. The employee before him had vanished there, but her access card kept opening doors from inside the locked station. It is called Cold Carrier. I maintain radio systems for agencies that still need them when cell towers fail. Mountain counties use repeaters to carry sheriff, fire, road, and ambulance traffic over terrain that blocks direct signals. Most sites are small concrete buildings beside an antenna mast. A technician visits every few months, changes filters, tests batteries, and leaves. The equipment spends more time with snow than with people. Mercer Pass was the highest site in our western network. The station sat at 9,000 feet on a strip of rock between two avalanche slopes. In summer, the access road took 90 minutes in a four-wheel drive truck. In winter, we reached it by tracked carrier or helicopter. I knew the previous technician had disappeared there before I accepted the contract. Her name was Naomi Cross. She had driven up alone during an early storm to investigate interference on the county fire channel. Her truck was later found at the station with its engine cold and both doors locked. The outer door recorded her badge entering at 4:22 p.m. It never recorded her leaving. The building contained one equipment room, one battery room, and a short vestibule. Searchers removed wall panels, inspected ventilation ducts, and dug through the drifted snow around the foundation. There was nowhere for Naomi to be. Our company called it an unresolved access incident. Technicians called it the reason nobody went to Mercer Pass alone. 14 months later, staffing shortages turned that custom into a suggestion. The problem began with a carrier signal on an unused frequency. It appeared every evening just after 3 and remained for 8 minutes. The signal carried no clear voice, but it overloaded an older receiver and caused gaps in fire dispatch traffic. Remote resets did nothing. Somebody had to replace the receiver and inspect the antenna feed. Weather gave me a 6-hour window. I took a tracked carrier up with tools, food, a sleeping bag, and enough diesel to stay overnight if necessary. The forecast called for light snow after sunset and clearing by morning. By the time I reached the station, the forecast had become fiction. Clouds covered the pass. Wind erased my tracks almost as soon as I made them. The antenna mast vanished into blowing snow 20 feet above the roof. The station looked exactly as it did in the plans. A low prefabricated building, one steel entrance, no windows except a small wired glass pane in the vestibule. I badged in at 1:47 p.m. and reported my arrival over the service channel. The dispatcher asked me to confirm I was alone. I made a joke about the snowplow crew hiding in my tool case. She did not laugh. Mercer has shown 2 credentials since noon, she said. Which is the second? Cross, Naomi. The access system had logged Naomi's badge opening an interior door labeled B. There was no door B at Mercer Pass. The dispatcher attributed it to a database fault and promised to keep the channel open while I worked. Inside, rows of black equipment racks filled the main room. Cooling fans made a steady mechanical roar. The battery room stood behind a gray door on the right. An empty desk, 2 chairs, and a wall-mounted first aid box occupied the other side. Naomi's coat still hung from a hook near the entrance. It was a red insulated parka with a company patch on the shoulder. Searchers had left it because her family could not decide whether to take it. A paper visitor tag remained clipped to the zipper. I tried not to look at it. The faulty receiver occupied rack 4. I connected a spectrum analyzer and found the unwanted carrier at the exact frequency in the service ticket. It was clean, narrow, and strong enough to originate nearby. At 3:08, a voice rose through the analyzer speaker. "Do not acknowledge the access alarm." It was a woman's voice compressed by static. The station alarm sounded 1 second later. A panel above the desk displayed "Door be open." I called the dispatcher. "Mercer Control, I have an access alarm for a door that isn't here." The woman on the analyzer said, "Now it has your voice." The dispatcher answered through the service radio, but her transmission overlapped something identical. I heard her response twice, the second version arriving half a second before the first. Then both radios went silent. The outer door would not open. Its electronic latch had frozen in the locked position. I used the mechanical release, but pressure held the door against its frame. Snow already covered the wired glass outside. I reported the lockout over satellite phone. The company told me to shelter overnight. Wind had closed the access road, and no aircraft could reach the pass until morning. I shut off the analyzer speaker. The woman's voice continued through the rack cooling fans. "Turn me back on." I did. "Naomi?" I asked. The carrier dropped instantly. Before it disappeared, my analyzer saved 8 seconds of the signal. I played the recording at half speed. Naomi's warning occupied the center channel, but other voices lay beneath it, shifted by fractions of a second. One belonged to the dispatcher. One belonged to me. A third was a man reciting weather conditions from a storm that had buried an earlier relay station on Mercer Pass in 1978. I found the incident report in the station's offline maintenance archive. The first Mercer repeater had been a smaller concrete bunker 30 yards uphill. An avalanche destroyed its antenna and buried the building. 2 road technicians survived inside for 4 days by transmitting through a damaged emergency aerial. Rescue crews dug them out, and the bunker was later abandoned because the slope remained unstable. According to the construction drawings, the current station had been placed downhill on new foundations. According to a survey map attached to the report, both stations occupied the same coordinates. The archived file included a photograph of the rescue. Snow surrounded a black doorway. 3 men stood outside. The caption named only 2 survivors. The third man faced away from the camera. He wore a radio company jacket with our current logo, a design created 36 years after the photograph was taken. I tried to transmit the picture to our dispatcher, but the file changed when I attached it. The third figure turned toward the camera. It had my face. "Door be open" somewhere beneath the floor. I felt it rather than heard it. Cold air lifted through the cable openings under rack 4. Frost spread across the concrete in a straight line from the rack to the battery room wall. My badge reader beeped though the badge was clipped to my belt. The access display showed my name entering door B. I removed the badge and wrapped it in foil from my lunch. The display logged another entry. This one belonged to Naomi. The carrier returned at 3:11. It can repeat anything transmitted inside the station. she said. Names give it permission to route you. I kept quiet. If you hear yourself from the lower corridor, do not answer. It only knows what the equipment has heard. I wrote a question on a pad and held it in front of the station's security camera. Where are you? The analyzer clicked twice. Below the first station. I wrote that there was no lower level. There wasn't when I arrived. Naomi explained in broken transmissions. During her final visit, she had traced the carrier to a cable dropping beneath Rack 4. The cable did not appear on plans. When she moved the rack, she found a steel hatch and stairs descending into a copy of the station. The lower room contained older equipment, some of it dating to the 1970s, but every transmitter carried current traffic. Voices passed through before they were spoken above. The lower station was not predicting radio calls. It was sending them upward. At the far end, Dorby opened into a concrete passage filled with snow. Naomi had entered the passage after hearing a search team call her name from the other side. The door locked behind her. She had walked toward their voices and returned to the same door from the opposite direction. She had been in the corridor for less than 2 days. Outside, 14 months had passed. I wrote another question. What is in there with you? The carrier hissed for so long I thought she would not answer. Every voice the station has ever relayed. Something knocked behind the battery room wall. 3 evenly spaced impacts. A pause. 3 more. The wall was concrete block. I knew from the exterior dimensions that only 2 feet separated it from the back of the building. Frost outlined a door frame where no seam had existed. A badge reader emerged beneath the ice. The indicator turned green. The door opened inward. Beyond it was a narrow, arched corridor lined with cables. Snow covered the floor. Utility lights receded toward another steel door 50 yards away. A line of boot prints led from that door toward me. They were appearing one at a time. No person made them. The snow compressed, lifted at the toe, and formed the next print closer. I closed the impossible door before the prints reached the threshold. The concrete seam vanished, leaving frost on the wall. Naomi's carrier weakened. The automatic test will start at 4, she said. It opens every route. The station performed a weekly emergency test at 4 a.m. Antenna relays switched, backup transmitters keyed, and the access system unlocked doors in case of fire. Remote control was offline. To cancel the test, I had to move a physical jumper in the controller. The controller was in rack 4. The same rack now stood over a square steel hatch. I had not moved it. The hatch simply extended from beneath the frame, edged in white frost. A recessed handle waited at my feet. I could leave the jumper untouched and let every radio path open at 4, or descend into the lower station and cancel it. I asked Naomi what would happen if the test ran. It will transmit a relief request on every county frequency, she said. Police, fire, road, medical. Anybody who answers will be routed here. How do I get back? Do not speak. Do not follow a voice. Move the jumper and return before your carrier drops. My carrier? The analyzer showed a second signal beside hers. It contained my breathing. I opened the hatch. A steel ladder descended through the floor. 10 feet below, old green transmitters filled a room the same shape as the one above. Their glass meters glowed. Dust covered every surface except the path between the ladder and the control rack. I left my radio upstairs and climbed down without speaking. The lower station smelled of hot wiring and snow. County dispatch voices murmured from the equipment, each sentence arriving before I had heard it on the live channel. At the rear of the room, Naomi's red coat hung from an empty hook. The coat upstairs had disappeared. The test controller was where she said it would be. I opened its panel and found the jumper. As I reached for it, the transmitter beside me keyed. My own voice came through. Naomi, I found the controller. I had not said it. From the snowy corridor behind door B, Naomi answered. I hear you. The future transmission played through the rack, waiting for me to complete it. I kept my mouth closed and pulled the jumper. Every light in the lower station went out. Door B opened. The corridor beyond was lit by pale ceiling lamps. Boot prints covered the snow now, hundreds crossing over one another. At the far end stood a woman in a red parka. She raised one hand. I knew Naomi from photographs. The woman had her face, but her mouth moved ahead of the words coming through the dead transmitters. Please, the rack said in Naomi's voice. I've been waiting 2 days. Behind her, shapes gathered along the passage. Some wore sheriff uniforms. Some wore road department orange. One had my coat and my face. They had been made from every voice that answered a call relayed through Mercer Pass. The real Naomi spoke from the analyzer upstairs, faintly audible through the open hatch. That isn't me. The woman in the corridor ran toward the door. I climbed. Halfway up, the station began the automatic test despite the missing jumper. Relays slammed shut. Sirens sounded from both rooms. The false Naomi reached the ladder and seized the lowest rung. I pulled myself through the hatch and kicked it closed. A hand struck the steel from beneath. The rack shifted across the lid as the test keyed every transmitter at once. My voice went out over the fire channel. Mercer Pass requesting relief. Naomi's voice followed over the sheriff channel. Confirm your name and location. Dispatchers across the county began to answer. I grabbed the main antenna feed and unscrewed it from the combiner. Radio frequency current burned my palm. The connector resisted, then tore free. The station went off the air. Every voice stopped. The frost door in the battery room wall opened a final time. Snow blew into the equipment room. For a moment, I saw the real Naomi standing halfway down the corridor. She looked exactly as she did in her employee photograph. There were no shapes behind her, no copies, and no fear left in her face. She pointed to the outer door. I pulled the mechanical release again. The wind pressure changed, and the door opened 6 inches against the drift. I forced myself through and crawled into the storm. The tracked carrier was nearly buried. I started it, turned downhill, and followed reflective stakes until I cleared the avalanche zone. I do not remember most of the descent. The station burned before dawn. Disconnecting the antenna had reflected transmitter power back into the combiner and started an electrical fire. Because of the weather, nobody reached Mercer Pass until the following afternoon. The roof had collapsed. The racks were slag. The concrete walls remained standing. Investigators found no lower hatch and no corridor. They did find Naomi's access badge fused into the interior surface of the battery room wall. Her red parka was never recovered. The county replaced Mercer Pass with 2 lower elevation repeaters. The old frequency was removed from every licensed system in the region. I left mountain work and moved into commercial building communications. My current job is in a city where I can see an occupied coffee shop from the equipment room window. For almost a year, I heard nothing from Mercer Pass. Then, during an overnight test, a carrier appeared on one of our office radios. It lasted 8 minutes. The frequency was not programmed into the unit. At first, there was only static. Then Naomi spoke. Do not acknowledge the access alarm. 1 second later, the building panel displayed an open door in the basement. Door B. I evacuated the building and cut power to the radio system before anyone answered. Security searched the basement and found no open door. They did find a line of melting snow across the concrete floor. It began beneath our antenna cable and ended at the elevator. There were 2 sets of boot prints. One matched the boots I had worn at Mercer Pass. The other set was barefoot. If you take an isolated job, learn the name of the person who held it before you. Ask where they went, why they left, and whether anybody actually watched them leave. An empty post is not proof that a shift ended. Sometimes it only means the handover is still waiting. This has been the Ashen Frequency. If you would like more original late-night transmissions, you can subscribe and return for the next account. Until then, keep the radio low, keep the doors locked, and do not answer anyone who already knows your name.